Hi, I'm Maddy.
And hey, it's Doug, and welcome to The Crew of Japan, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
Today we're going to spotlight the super awesome and underrated sister city relationship between Matsue and New Orleans. It's a bond that I think few might expect, with a rich history of cultural exchange and diplomatic relations that have left a profound mark on the histories of both cities, and I think will continue to do so for a while. In this episode, we are super thrilled and excited to have guest host Sam Perez.
Samantha is the assistant professor of history at Southeastern Louisiana University and was the coordinator of the New Orleans Matsue Sister City Exchange Program for Japan Society of New Orleans in 2019. All right, without further ado, let's just dive right on in. All right, well, today we have Dr. Samantha Perez, assistant professor of history at Southeastern Louisiana University, with us. She was the Matsue Sister City Program coordinator for the Japan Society of New Orleans I keep saying this past year, but 2019 is a long time away at this point. We've been through so much since then. So Sam, do you want to take a second to introduce yourself and say a little something?
Yeah, I'm just super excited. Thanks for having me. I love talking about Matsue, so this is a special treat. I am a historian by trade, and a lot of my research is focuses on the communication of cultural identity, and I ask questions about how people interact with other cultures and how they form their own idea of who they are. And so some of my research, which is in the early modern period, I'm really a Renaissance historian. I deal a little bit about Renaissance connections with Japan, and that's kind of how I got into this. And I became a member of the Japan Society of New Orleans, and I fell in love with it.
Awesome, thank you. That's great. I know when we did our trip, you were all up on all the historical landmarks and the preservation pieces. So it was really interesting to kind of see you geek out about some of those things.
Hey, it's an occupational hazard.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do is, before we kind of truck along, let's take a step back and just kind of define what a sister city is for those who don't know. A sister city relationship is really, whether it could be legal or a social agreement, between two distinct locations across the world for the purpose of promoting cultural and commercial ties. And if that sounds like a really good definition, it's because I Googled it.
Hey.
I just threw that out there. I'm not going to give myself that much credit. But yeah, so New Orleans and Matsue entered into our sister city relationship back in 1994. And then during Katrina, it kind of fell off a little bit because of, obviously, for economic rebuilding reasons. But around in 2011, it kind of picked up steam again. And just recently in 2015, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. But there have been some events between that 25th anniversary and 1994 that were pretty significant. And, some of the folks here participated in some of our earlier exchanges. So, you want to tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so the cool thing about sister city relationships is that New Orleans has so many of them. We have them in Venezuela, we have them in Austria, Mexico, France, obviously. But the thing about each sister city relationship is what makes that one special and unique, and how that specific sister city has connections to New Orleans. And so the sister city relationship between New Orleans and Matsue, it's unlike any of the other sister city relationships that New Orleans has, and even Matsue has. And I was really stunned the first time that I visited Matsue, and I realized how many connections there were. We'll probably talk about the main ones like Lafcadio Hearn and Little Mardi Gras, but there's so many things that go beyond the surface of what ties Matsue to New Orleans and the kind of bonds that we've formed. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I definitely noticed a specific feel to Matsue that reminded me of New Orleans that I wasn't expecting at all.
I think the friendliness too of it, that it felt a lot like home the first time that I went there. Everybody is just so amazing in Matsue that the people that I met on my first trip are friends with me to this day. And I can't imagine not being friends with them and having them in my life. So it's a really special place.
So you went for the first time in 2015, right?
Right. And I was just finding out about the Japan Society of New Orleans. And really, I got this phone call from a coworker from my mom. And she said that on the morning in the news that they had our president, Mike Turner, had been on the news morning show and was talking about how they were accepting applications for the Tomodachi program. And so back in 2015, we had a program made possible by the U.S.-Japan Council, the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, and the Tomodachi Initiative. And so it was part of a 2-year program, 2014 and 2015. In 2014, we had young professionals from Matsue come and visit New Orleans. And in 2015, when I found out about it, they were looking for young professionals from the greater New Orleans area to travel to Matsue and get to know the city and be part of this kind of next generation and strengthening these ties between New Orleans and Matsue. And really, that's part of the whole mission of the Japan Society of New Orleans, is strengthening these bonds between our two nations. I was selected as one of the group that went to Matsue, and it was life-changing. It really was.
Did y'all do a homestay at that point?
We did. And talking about the friends that you meet, they're the ones that when we went back in 2019, when I was coordinator, they're the ones I stayed with again. And we send presents throughout the year because they have little girls and I've got a daughter. And so we'll do present share, and, you know, that they opened their home to me again when I came back, you know, it's really special.
It's pretty awesome, especially you kind of develop that relationship with them and then it stayed in touch. We're able to rekindle that when you went back on the previous or this most recent exchange. And, you know, like you said, you've been sending presents back and forth, and you would always kind of refer to them as your extended family. You know, they were your family away from your family in Japan. So it was always pretty cool. I always like that.
Yeah, they really are. They've been in part of some important life moments, which I guess is probably the overshare. But I was pregnant the first time that I went. And she was one of my homestay mom was one of the first people that I told ever that I was
Aw.
pregnant. And so I got to watch her little girls and, you know, help take care of them and get to know them when I was there in Matsue. And then I now have a little girl of my own. And, you know, it's just a really special thing for me.
So can we talk about where Matsue is? Because I know I'm not going to do a good job of explaining it.
Yeah. Actually, you know, I was thinking about that. I'm like, we've been talking about Matsue, but I don't know if anyone knows where Matsue actually is when you look at a map of Japan. And to be honest, prior to really hearing about Matsue through the Sister City program back in 2019, I wasn't really familiar with Matsue, and I had no idea where it was. I'm not gonna lie.
Me neither.
Yeah, no, sorry, Sam. I didn't mean to tell you that.
Yeah, that's the dirty little secret.
Yeah, yes.
But now you're explaining exactly where Matsue is on a map, so I've done my job.
We're making up for it, yeah.
I'm looking at a map right now. The main island of Japan is called Honshu. And at the very kind of bottom left corner of Honshu is the Chugoku region. And in that region, there is Shimane Prefecture, it's a pretty thin, I guess, I don't want to say thin, I don't know, really
Narrow.
There we
narrow.
go.
That's the word I'm looking for. God, that $10 word, huh? It's on the Sea of Japan coast side of Japan. And within Shimane is Matsue. So getting to there, from door to door, from New Orleans to Matsue, or actually it was Izumo Airport, was it 25 hours?
Something like that.
Approximately. Maybe
It's a pretty long trip.
Yeah. It was, I remember we woke up Samantha, you woke up way earlier because you had to drive from Chalmette, but I'm like right by the airport, so it's a little bit closer. But you know, we woke up really early for that 7 a.m. flight. I want to say it was about 24 hours, 25 hours until we got to the hotel.
Yeah, door to door for sure. Especially because once we got to the airport, all the way in Izumo, we still had like an hour-long drive, and then we had dinner, and then we got back to the hotel.
Yeah, because when flying into Japan, we flew into Tokyo, did a layover there, changed terminals, changed planes, and from there we flew to Izumo Airport. There are ways to get there by train, and they even have night buses and whatnot that could take you there, but from Tokyo, if you fly into Tokyo. But yeah, probably the easiest way is to get in through Izumo Airport. But yeah, that was quite an adventure, and I gotta say I was exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah, definitely. It felt like a week wasn't enough to I guess make up for how long it took us to get there. Like 2 of those days were just straight up travel. So next time we'll have to go for longer.
I went to work the next day. That when we got back, both times that I landed back, I was up at work and teaching the next day. So it's a journey even when you get back.
We left on like a Tuesday, right? Or was it a Wednesday to Wednesday or Tuesday to Wednesday? I can't remember, but we did leave like middle of the week. It wasn't like we planned it out where we're leaving on a weekend. It was middle of the week. So coming back home, for us, it was like, holiday, but coming back, no one else was in that mindset. We were all like back to the grind, no time to reminisce.
I was the latest I've ever been for work unintentionally that next day because I just didn't wake up with the alarm, and around like 10 a.m. I showed up like in a flurry. Like I just threw clothes on and ran to work, and all of them were like, Maddy, are you okay?
Yeah, it was definitely. I'm fortunate enough at the time I was working from home doing some IT work, and I was able to oversleep my commute by a few minutes and then just walk over to my computer.
Lucky.
So I was safe. I didn't have to. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to say that out loud to you guys.
It's okay. One of us had to have a good run of it.
Yeah. So that's kind of like where Matsue is, how to get to it. Once you get to Matsue, there's actually you can train and bus around town. There is actually something we're going to talk about in a little bit. Another way to get around Matsue. We'll touch on that in a second, but. Before we get too far into like the touristy aspect and telling you where to go, let's give you a little bit more information about Matsue and the ties that, like Samantha talked about earlier, the ties that may connect New Orleans and Matsue. There is a guy named Lafcadio Hearn. Have you guys heard of him ever?
I know I hadn't heard of him until the exchange happened, and now I know just an ungodly amount of information about his life.
Well, he's so fascinating too, is that
he is.
I mean, this man traveled and he had such an impact on informing worldwide audiences about New Orleans and Japan. So he's a 19th century writer. He's actually, as much as this guy's going to travel, he's born in Greece. He goes over to Ireland where he kind of grows up, and then he comes over to the United States. He ends up in Cincinnati and starts working as a newspaper reporter, a journalist. And so down the line, he comes down to New Orleans. And so it's there that through that connection that he has to New Orleans, and then in 5 seconds when I finish the story that he'll move over to Japan and Matsue, it's that travel really that we use as the kind of basis of our sister city connection. It's Lafcadio Hearn that's the reason that all of this happens. And so for me, from the historian perspective, is that Hearn is so important, really the cultural historian perspective, is that Hearn is so important for giving us this idea of what New Orleans is. So like when you look at New Orleans on in movies or in books or in like those terrible shows with vampires, that New Orleans, not Interview with a Vampire, that's gold, but like the CW version, right, where it's got kind of that like that mystery and that feel of the French Quarter, that there's something just supernatural and mystique going on about New Orleans. A lot of that romantic view of the city is coming from Lafcadio Hearn. That he's the reason that image of New Orleans gets broadcasted because of his role as a journalist, gets broadcasted through the whole rest of the world as he writes about New Orleans. And he writes all kinds of stuff about the city. Its food and its people and its magic like voodoo. And then after that, he leaves New Orleans and heads over to Japan, not just anywhere, but Matsue.
And wasn't it in New Orleans that he found out about Japan, kind of had that awakening?
Oh my gosh. So, and this is where it starts getting to my research a little bit, is that he actually finds out about Japan at the World's Fair that takes place. That he,
Yes.
yeah, so he visits the World's Fair in 1884, I believe, and he is walking around the World's Fair, and they have obviously like stations for different places, and he finds out about Japan. He gets this book about Japan, and he reads it, and he just falls in love with the same kind of something else that he sees in New Orleans, and it's that prompts him, it inspires him to move, to pick up everything. And the thing about it that's so incredible is that really contact with Japan was moderately new at this point. You know, that a lot of Western audiences, especially in the United States, did not have a whole lot of information about Japan. It was only in the 1850s that Commodore Matthew Perry starts to reopen up contact with the West in Japan. And so this is still a pretty new thing when he decides in the 1880s to pack up everything and leave for Japan.
What a life.
And that means that, when he comes over, his role as a journalist, as he gives this image of what Japan is, and he starts doing the same thing of looking at culture the way that he did in New Orleans, now doing that same thing to Japan, and using his role as a journalist, that he starts giving this picture of what Japan is and what Japan is like for all of these Western audiences. He writes this whole series of articles for like Harper's that are about his life in Japan.
And didn't he end up writing like ghost stories and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, I was actually going to say that was kind of one of his connections between each of those places he lived, Cincinnati, New Orleans, and then eventually Matsue and Tokyo, because he did move to Tokyo too. He had this fascination with the occult and ghost stories, and that's kind of what brought him to New Orleans. That kind of like supernatural feel like Samantha was just talking about. And then when he went to Japan, he kind of took that same fascination with those ghost stories and did some research. And his wife kind of helped introduce him to those types of stories, and then really kind of broadened his horizons in that regard. And a lot of his writings were about those ghost stories in Japan, whether it was translating existing stories or, writing some others. And one thing we didn't mention, if you say Lafcadio Hearn in Japan, they may not recognize that name, but he actually took a Japanese name, Koizumi Yakumo. And that name actually, if you go into Matsue, you'll see Yakumo this, Koizumi Yakumo that. You'll see little things everywhere of like his image, some kind of paraphernalia or souvenirs all over the place.
Even neckties. Yeah. Neckties and candy were the things that stunned me the most about what they put Lafcadio Hearn on.
He's a local celebrity.
He really is. His wife was actually Kazumi Setsuko, and she is the one that tells him a lot of the ghost stories, which brings in all kinds of really interesting things about authorship and cultural communication for me, that his wife is giving these stories to him that she knows, right? It's really cool stuff.
It's kind of like that oral tradition, like passing down, stories from generation to generation, except this wasn't a generational pass down. It was just to a spouse, and he was able to translate those and pen them in English to share those stories with the outside world.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing that kind of it came directly from the mouth of somebody who knew.
Yeah, so like his one of his most popular books or most famous is like Kwaidan.
That's also the inspiration for Japan Society of New Orleans book club, is that it's named after Kwaidan. Yeah, for that reason.
I've never picked up on that. How cute. I love that.
The Lafcadio Hearn Museum in Matsue is also unbelievable.
Yeah.
They've done a lot of recent work and renovations for it and remodeling to make this absolutely impressive exhibit. I guess this is me geeking out again, Doug. The museum is just unbelievable now. That I got to see it right when we went for the 2019 exchange, that to celebrate the 25-year anniversary of the sister city relationship, we got to go see the new museum, and it's very close to where Lafcadio Hearn's house is preserved. And they have like,
Which is also a museum in itself, yeah?
right. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
stuff that got me hooked on history in the first place. Like the cool stuff, like how his desk is really high because his eyesight was so poor, and you get to see his writing desk and you actually get to sit in it. And so you can imagine what it was like for him to be writing these stories and working in this space. And I know that I'm making people probably very jealous and want to go to travel to Matsue, which they absolutely should, but the house is beautiful. You have the gardens all around it, and you just imagine this space that he's in.
Yeah, how could you not be inspired, sitting there looking out at the trees?
Oh, it's beautiful. And so they redid the museum right next to it, and it's incredible that you have the timeline that follows his life and all of the places that he's gone, and you see the kind of the moments of inspiration that led him to fall in love with Japan and fall in love with Matsue. And of course, fall in love with his wife in Matsue.
Yeah, and one thing too, we've been talking a lot about Lafcadio Hearn and his impact on Matsue, but where he lived, it was right in the heart of Matsue. But that whole area is what they call Shiomi Nawate Street, or the Samurai District. And they have so many little museums, restaurants, gardens, all this beautiful, the preserve, or they try to restore it to look like historic Japan, like samurai times, to keep those homes and make them as I guess preserved of what they were in the past. And maybe I'm not speaking to this well enough, and I should let Samantha talk to that, because this is again her area of expertise. But that whole area is just phenomenal, and it's all kind of surrounding the castle.
So that whole area is meant to be this kind of stepping into the past, which is absolutely incredible when you go there. And especially so because it's surrounded by Matsue Castle, which I guess is a good point for us to talk about Matsue Castle, right?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah, that was one of the highlights of my trip over there. I loved that area, yeah. And the castle is gorgeous.
Because the idea of the Samurai Street, as I remember, is that it kind of surrounded the castle so that it would be, you'd have the castle, a moat, and then all of your most trusted soldiers living all around you as an added layer of protection.
Right. Which is all part of that construction of the Edo city, which is what Matsue started as this kind of area, this kind of castle town, right? And you can see it, especially with the Samurai Street that's preserved there, but then the layout of the city as a whole. It's really cool stuff.
And didn't they say that they often film samurai movies in that area because it's so similar to how it would have looked?
Did they?
I think they did.
Yeah, they did. They had said that there's certain angles when they were filming down the street. If you look at it, you don't capture the power lines. They try to minimize the visibility of all those kind of modernized technology. So you could do some of these long span shots on film, and it looks completely like you're actually in those times. That's how preserved they are.
Mm-hmm. So if you visit Matsue, you might just see a samurai film getting filmed, just, an extra reason to visit.
That's awesome. Preservation is actually one of the things that connects us to Matsue as well, New Orleans and Matsue. And one of the things that we got to talk about when we went to Matsue the last time was how these efforts to preserve those districts, those historic districts, are so deliberate that they will try to minimize the kind of markings on roads so that, to keep it safe, obviously, but to kind of just make sure that things look as authentic as possible, and the colors remain pretty consistent to the time period too. And that's something that we have to deal with when we talk about the preservation of things like the French Quarter and our own historic buildings.
Yeah, you get into this place where the I believe we spoke with like some architects and like somebody from the city of Matsue who kind of described to us the very specific building codes that have to be followed in order for a new project to even occur in these preserved areas, which I imagine is very similar to the French Quarter.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome stuff about the preservation of history and how that is not just for the sake of preserving history and learning from it, which is obviously something I care deeply about, but also for giving an idea of what attracts people to Matsue. And the castle and the castle area is so part of that, because Japan does not have many original castles left. I think there's about 12 original castles that a lot of them were destroyed in the century since the Edo period, that, you know, that with world wars and with kind of Meiji reactions to eras before, that a lot of these castles were actually lost or destroyed intentionally. And that makes Matsue's castle so very special, that it's one of the very few original castles that are still standing.
And yet, as I remember it, it never, though it was built to be incredibly defensive, it never quite had to defend against anything.
And one other thing too, because a lot of people think like the daimyo or like the lord of the area lived in the castle. It's actually, he didn't. He had a home outside of it, but it was actually just more of a stronghold and like a military preparation place where they can go and
Just your casual office.
Yeah, you can definitely see that in the architecture when you go inside of the castle. I mean, there's some living space, but it's very much meant for defense. The small windows so that you could throw rocks out of them, and then the kind of like archer windows so that you can shoot down your arrows to the ground below.
And it's very tall, very hard to climb.
Yeah, I was gonna say the logistics to get up to the top where you would go into the castle, you literally have to kind of wind and go through these walls or gates and climb up steps and now steps, but back then I'm sure it was a lot more difficult to get around and to access. So it's up.
It's pretty difficult now.
Yeah, it was a bit of a trek,
especially when you have your socks on, because you take your shoes off at the bottom, and I always remember this moment of almost slipping up the steps.
I did the same thing.
Oh, I totally slipped. I slipped and caught myself, fortunately. But yeah, God forbid you fall down those steps, because those are steep.
Well, and inside, they've kind of turned it into a museum of the region, yeah.
For sure. And the cool thing about Matsue's castle is that the castle gets started, I think, about the year 1607-ish, and it takes obviously a couple years to complete. But the real thing about that specific time period is that that's actually at the very beginnings, more or less, of Western contact with Japan in the first place. That the Portuguese show up in about 1543 and open up Japan to Western contact. And so when the castle is built, about, starting in 1607, it's this moment of incredible change in the region. And you can see that because in the museum they have like some early guns that were introduced from the Europeans when they start showing up in Japan.
That's right.
I am always amazed when people just casually drop years of like countries entering into a country or doing something. I'm like, man, I can barely remember like people's birthdays or phone numbers. So like the fact that you could just drop those, I always get so impressed.
Props, Sam.
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
And the castle is actually surrounded by a moat that you can take a wonderfully leisurely boat ride on, with a lovely Matsuean serenading you as you experience.
As you duck, as you go through the bridges. So they have all these bridges, obviously over the moat that connect it to the castle. And when you're going down the boat ride, I love where you have to duck. And I mean, I don't mean like a casual dip your head duck. I mean that you are on the floor of the boat as the roof lowers and you pass through the bridge, like under the bridge.
Yeah, you really get to, it brings you around. The tour that we did, I want to say it was about 45 minutes, and they go around the castle, and then the tour guide, who fortunately they actually have English guided tours. So if you're interested in an English guided tour, and when you travel there, they have those. But the tour guide would kind of point things out and kind of give you some really cool tidbits of historical importance, or just like, oh, it's nice to know, or neat to know, did you know, type things as you're going around. But this mode, it was the primary means of navigating and transporting yourselves in Matsue back in the old days. Like they had steps that go down to the water, and people were washing clothes in that water because back then it was cleaner, I guess. But it was very much it was a water town, a water city.
Yeah, I mean I am from a water town, and I don't mean just New Orleans. I mean just further downriver, that my entire life I've been surrounded by canals and lakes, and my dad was an oyster fisherman, and that's just been such a part of who I am, that I think that's one of the reasons that I fell in love with Matsue, and that I just felt so comfortable there from the very beginning, because Matsue is a water town. You're right. And that's not one of the things that you think of when you think of this sister city relationship, that it's all about Lafcadio Hearn because he's on the neckties and on the boxes of candy. But there's so much more that connects us to Matsue, and our relationship to the water is a lot like that. At Matsue, you're right that it's close to the Sea of Japan, and that you have like Shinji right there, not to mention a lot of like rivers, and then some other lakes in that area as well. And so it's just, I remember one of the first times, the first time I went to Matsue, my host mom brought me out to go see them fishing for clams in the morning. And it's just something about it was just, it felt so familiar to me, because I've always grown up with a family of fishermen and shrimpers and oyster fishermen. And it was beautiful to see these connections to the water the way that we have them here in New Orleans.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean, they have Lake Shinji on one side, and on the other side is Lake Nakaumi. So I mean, they're both sides of their, east and west sides of Matsue is lakes, and to the north is the Sea of Japan. So 3 sides of the city are surrounded by water. So it's like you said, the culture itself is very much centered around these bodies of water. And like you mentioned, the Lake Shinji, then having the clam fishing, those shijimi is like one of the top delicacies of Matsue.
And they'll put it in the miso. They'll have like all sorts of different regional specialties that just have shijimi in them.
Which is the other cool thing about Matsue's connection to food too. That again, the things you don't think about, but like Green's Baby is a restaurant in Matsue and has very special connections to New Orleans, because they are a kind of like a Japanese New Orleans fusion restaurant.
Yeah, it's so cool to find these little pockets of connection. Well, and that kind of reminds me of that little Mardi Gras day, and like the little connections that it also reminds me of are like when Sam, I think you were talking about this story where you were walking home after all the little Mardi Gras stuff was done, or maybe it was another day, and you heard somebody playing trumpet or something like that on the street.
Yeah, they had dragged a piano out, and it was a guy playing, and it was so amazing because they were just, playing second line music in the street. And you think about when you're walking around down here and you see street musicians, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things you mentioned, Little Mardi Gras, and that was actually one of the central pieces of our exchange program, is participating in this Little Mardi Gras parade that happens annually in October. And we dressed in Mardi Gras attire. We had beads and doubloons. And the funniest thing is when we were going through these parades, they had high school bands and whatnot kind of doing like a marching band competition. And one of the funniest things is as we're walking, we have these beads, we have these doubloons. You have people standing along the street, not nearly as crowded as you would think, and there's no floats or anything like that, but you're just walking down the street, and then we're like, oh, it's Mardi Gras, let's throw beads, let's throw doubloons. So we're throwing beads at people, throwing doubloons, and they're just standing there like, what the hell are these people doing? Like, we're throwing things and it's just hitting them, or they're like dodging it. They're not even trying to catch it. So it's like one of those like cultural like gaps that we don't really think about, but for us it's second nature.
I got in the habit of going up to the little kids and handing them the bead or the doubloon, and I felt like I was handing my business card.
You know, I actually think I scarred a little girl because the job that I had at the time, they sent me with some throws as, you know, just a little token of goodwill. And my boss at the time had gotten like little plastic alligators, but they were very realistic. And, you know, of course, for like Mardi Gras here, kind of weird, bizarre throws are a specialty and something that you'd really enjoy getting. And it didn't really occur to me that it might be something scary to hand to like a 10-year-old. And so I tried to give it to this little girl, and she like screamed and ran away.
Yeah, and I mean, it was always just kind of funny. Like, I'm pretty sure I hit like a couple people in like the face with beads, not intentionally, but like just kind of lobbing them up, and they weren't looking. They weren't just thinking that Mardi Gras beads are going to be thrown at them.
And yet it still had such a festive vibe to it. You know, it was very colorful and very loud.
I mean, and it was just filled with this love of New Orleans too, that so many people come to go look at this little Mardi Gras parade in Matsue that it has so much of a draw that you have all of the high school bands come and play, and then they're playing, you know, second line music, and they're just I remember there were Saints colors that you could see, and there's the flag of the city of New Orleans that they're having through the parade alongside of the Matsue flag, and it's this huge celebration of the things that do connect our cities.
Absolutely.
Man, we could literally talk about Matsue for hours. I mean, we've barely touched on other places to go outside of like the castle area, and there's so much more, not just in Matsue, but like in the surrounding areas outside of it. So
we'll have to do multiple more episodes.
Yeah, I was about to say, Sam, we might have to have you back for like a future episode.
Definitely multiple.
I'd be glad to.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I have one question for each of us. So bear with me here. It's your last night in Matsue, maybe last morning. It's 4 a.m. You found yourself in the back of a snack bar after having multiple beverages, and you have to pick one 1990s to early 2000s pop song to sing. What would you sing in karaoke? Sam, I'll let you go first.
Obviously, if this were a complete and total hypothetical, I would be picking songs from my favorite band, which is Aqua. Okay. Yes, I am admitting that on what will become a widely broadcast podcast. Aqua is awesome, and I would straight up be singing Aqua. I'm guessing Barbie Girl is like the classic I should probably be going with, but I might have to put some other songs in there too. Can I sing more than one? I feel like I should be able to sing more than one.
I mean, of course, but I mean, this is your last one.
All right, my last one? Okay.
Yeah, your last song before you close out your tab, hypothetical tab.
Hypothetical tab.
And then hypothetically walk 45 minutes to a Lawson to get convenient food before going to bed and having to wake up in like 2 hours.
Okay. Wait, did you say 80s to 90s, right?
90s to early 2000s.
Oh, 90s to early 2000s. Okay. Then yeah, I'm going to go with Dr. Jones by Aqua. It is both a great song and occupationally relevant.
I love it.
Maddy, what about you?
I'm trying to remember what in this hypothetical situation I might have considered. I think I remember, I mean, I would possibly hypothetically be singing a song from Grease.
I'll allow it.
Do y'all remember that? What's that last song they sang? That I got chills. Da, 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 da. Like, what was that song called?
Oh my God, you put me on the spot here. I was the one supposed to be putting people on spots, not you.
How the tables have turned.
No.
It's that one song. If y'all know it, you know it. That's my go-to.
Isn't it like, oh my gosh, you're the one that I want? Is that right? Is
That's
that
it.
Yes.
Is that the name of it though?
Yeah, that's it.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful, Maddy.
Oh my goodness. What about you, Doug?
All right. You know, Sam stole Barbie Girl from me,
Man.
so that's usually my go-to.
2 Aqua songs.
And anyone that is listening to this podcast that knows me or did Jet program with me or has been to karaoke with me knows that I definitely have tried a few songs from either Aqua, Barbie Girl, Lady Gaga, or The Darkness, I Believe in a Thing Called Love. Those are like my 3 go-to.
Okay, wait, but wasn't there, in this completely hypothetical situation, a rap song that you did?
Eminem, my name is.
You did it twice, which is hypothetically
That's right.
would have done
Oh
it
my
twice.
God. I hypothetically don't remember because I.
There we go. There it is.
All right. Well, that was our conversation about Matsue and our trip over there and the program, which is absolutely phenomenal. You know, once COVID and this pandemic kind of starts to dissipate and we can go back to international travel and whatnot safely, you know, Japan Society is always going to be looking to have one of these exchange programs again in the future. So if this is something that does sound interesting to you and you would love to travel to Matsue, keep your eyes and ears peeled. You never know what you'll find. Samantha may be planning it. It could be one of us. Who knows? But you have to be you have to be a member of the Japan Society in New Orleans in order to participate. So keep that in mind.
Wink, wink.
But it is one of those reinvigorating, life-changing opportunities because you really do get to go immerse yourself in a brand new culture and learn about a place you've never been to, see people and things that you've never seen before. And again, we'll touch on these in other future episodes, but it is so much of a great opportunity. So please keep that in mind. And you know, Sam and Maddy, do you have any closing remarks about Matsue you want to pass on?
Yeah, actually, my little fun fact is I am the same age as the Matsue New Orleans sister city relationship, and I actually got to spend my 25th birthday in Matsue as a part of the 25th anniversary celebration, and I thought that was a really I don't know, it just felt like a fate or something like that. And I can't.
What a great birthday present.
I know. I mean, I definitely would have to echo what we've already been saying. I think Matsue is a really special place, and I love how rural it is, and yet how connected it is. You would never expect a place like Matsue to be such an international presence, and yet it is. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing, and I know that I'm counting the days until I can go back.
Just how incredible it is, and how welcoming Matsue is. One of my favorite memories, and I'll say this to close, one of my favorite memories is after the last little Mardi Gras parade. And so this is now my second time in Matsue. I have friends there, and I remember just walking back to where I was going to meet some people, and I'm walking just through the streets of Matsue just randomly, and I'm seeing people that I know.
Oh yeah.
And I'm waving to them, and I'm just walking through, like, the parade's over, the celebration's really over, and it was just such an amazing thing to be part of a community that has so much in common with us here in New Orleans.
Yeah, it was really, it's crazy how you can step out, and this is not just Matsue, but a lot of places in Japan. You're in like an urban center, and then you step out and kind of get into, you can go 10 minutes in one direction and maybe find a little outlet that makes you feel like you're lost in like the middle of, you know, trees, and you find a little like Shinto shrine or something really cool. It's really, really awesome. There was one thing, Sam, you reminded me of something, and I know we were about to wrap up, but I'm gonna steal one more memory here. One of the things about the Castletown area that we talked about earlier, they had a festival going on in October, and pretty much like you had all these like lit up like lights and lanterns along the path at night. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then they have a drum festival, a taiko festival that occurs during that same time, and all these little drum groups are practicing. So like they're playing their drum sets. As you're walking through, you could hear like little pockets in different neighborhoods, and just walk up and see people practicing. it was such a surreal experience to do that. Like the setting was beautiful and unique, and something you can really only, I don't want to say only experience in Matsue, but it was something I hadn't experienced in Japan up until that point. So if you get a chance to go to Japan, whenever that is in the future, I absolutely recommend Matsue. I think all three of us would absolutely recommend Matsue. It is a bit of a, I don't want to say out of the way, but if you're maybe traveling out to Kyoto or Hiroshima, it's not that far off the beaten path from there. So that's gonna wrap up our episode today on Matsue and our sister city relationship. So once again, thank you, Sam, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It was such a great time to talk, and we'll be sure to have you on in the future so that way we can talk about Matsue some more.
I'll be glad to be back.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much to Sam for joining us today. And thank you to you, our listeners. Maybe you came into this wondering, what's a Matsue?
Like me only a few years ago. Or maybe you already been there once or twice.
I hope this episode got you a little more interested in learning some more about this wonderful city.
So if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share your thoughts with us on social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's KREWEOFJAPAN. Krewe of Japan.
While you're there, subscribe and let us know how you are enjoying our podcast. That's it for today. Until next time.